Yeah, that's what the original one had. The line down the dash, if you get the speed, you put a little line. It's a decline. Should you land with the wheels up, it'll prop off there and still fly.
Okay, everybody. We had a few technology issues up the front here which have been resolved. So it's start time. My name's Ross Stenhouse. I'm the president of the Queensland Vinge Aeroplane Group. That's the clubhouse that you're in. This is our building on this airfield. The building itself is historical in nature in that it's a former RAF building from Archerfield from World War II. So I'd just like to welcome you all to Watts Bridge and welcome you all to QVAG. Today, being Australia Day, it's probably an opportune time to stage an event like this because World War I is seen as the forming of the Australian nation, and it's also where the early days of aviation were formed, and it's what the subject of today is, the building of World War I replica aircraft. So it sort of ties in really well with being Australia Day. The format of the day is I'm giving you a brief introduction. I'll be handing over to Andrew Carter. Andrew's got a number of presentations, and then Bruce Clark up the back there will say something after that, and then we break for lunch. Tea and coffee are free. Lunch is not free, but we're working on a donation principle. It's going to be sandwiches, really nice sandwiches, and up the back there, there's a thing where it says donations. So you put in there what you think your lunch was worth, and we prefer the folding stuff as opposed to the gold stuff. If you think it's shit, put $1 in. If you think they're good, put more. Yeah, part of this was because we forgot to get a float for the till. So, anyway, TAVAS is obviously a joint. This is a joint venture between our two groups, and yeah, so that's very significant. This is the first time we've done a joint venture like this with any other group. So it's a first for QVAG. We do have some merchandise that might be on sale just up the back of the room where the counter is there. There's just caps and things, nothing particularly fancy, but if you want one, I think the Vice President will probably be manning it around the lunch break time. And the final thing very important thing that I've got to say is that in the event of a fire, there's a doorway here, there's another doorway up the back there. If you could evacuate the building and go over through the fence to the row of hangars and assemble over there so that we know everybody's safe. And probably the most important thing is the toilets. We're using the airfield public toilets. There's a separate male and female toilet, and they're over there about 50 metres. If you go out one of the doors, you won't have any trouble finding them. We've left our toilet block locked up today because the other block's better. So on that, I'd like to welcome Andrew Carter to take over from me.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. They say you should never start a talk with an apology, but it was our intention to have the Fokker triplane here today. We did get flying early this morning for a photo shoot, and the conditions were anything but good. It's actually been quite atrocious. We ended up having to knock the photo shoot short. We tried to do some shots from the ground with me just doing a circuit, even that was too bumpy. So Natalie, my partner's here, she was watching it from the ground and she's put her foot down and said we definitely weren't flying to Watts Bridge. Would love to have done it. We'd love to have had it here for all of you to inspect. And if we'd really pushed it, we probably could have got it in here. I'm not so sure we could get it home, especially with the wind and the rain, the way it's picking up on the coast at the moment. So I do apologise for that. But I do thank you all for coming. It's fantastic to see such a large group here. Just can I get an idea to start with? How many are current TAVAS members? A bit over half. How many of you from Wattsbridge? How many from Kilcoy? How many from Caboolture? Okay. So there's a few other people were meant to be flying in as well from Kilcoy and Caboolture, and I'd say the weather's curtailed that as well, but we've got a pretty full room, so it's good to see. Yeah, here to talk to you about what the Australian Vintage Aviation Society is and what it's currently doing, where we're at and what we're trying to achieve and how we got this far. The aim of the organisation is simply to bring to life aircraft from the first 20 years of flight, in particular those that are relevant to Australia. Now the main emphasis at this stage, because of the centenary of World War I upon us, is obviously World War I aircraft. My particular interest is in pre-World War I aircraft, but it's the whole history of aircraft in general that we're trying to bring back to life, trying to introduce to the Australian public and get them interested in aviation again. I mean, let's face it, these days after you get off a Qantas flight, you don't think any more about an aircraft than you do a train or a bus. You know, the mystery and the magic of aviation's gone. How I got started is I've heard many of you here saying the same sort of thing. In 2011, I went to a marker. On the Friday there, I saw 14 World War I aircraft in the air at the one time. Now, as Kermit Weeks was saying when he was there, you'll never see that anywhere else in the world. And I was fascinated by it, and incredible spectacle in the sense that it's all in front of your face. Everyone can see what's going on. You get a real appreciation for the period from seeing that many aircraft in the air at the one time. Why aren't we doing something like that in Australia? So I came home and decided to do it. I had no idea how to go about it, and it was actually Natalie that got it started. Natalie was the one that made the first contacts. Natalie was the one that sort of pushed the issue and put me on the right track, and the two of us have been working together on it since the start of 2012. What was needed, we found, was we started talking to a lot of other people around Australia, anyone that's built World War I aircraft. There are quite a lot of builds going on. I'm going to cover that later on in this talk. But there's no national organisation. These were all backyard projects with no one talking to other people. Very few people knew what else was going on. There was no sort of encouragement or support. People were having trouble getting bits and pieces, not knowing that someone just down the road was doing something similar and had bits and pieces that could be used. So we set up the organisation to stand up and say, here we are, let's bring all the like-minded people together and see what we can do. One of the guys we were dealing with initially said to us, to build credibility, you really need to have your own aircraft. And I'd been looking at trying to get a D7, a Fokker D7 flying. We've been dealing with several people in the States who had various projects, various aircraft under different stages of construction, and all those deals sort of fell through. They just weren't going to work out. When we sat down and had to think about it, a Fokker D7 is probably not the best aircraft to represent the Australian Vintage Aviation Society. We needed an aircraft that was instantly recognisable, that drew attention, and that had a strong Australian connection. And the DR1 was the obvious choice. The all-red Fokker triplane was, of course, made famous by Baron Manfred von Richthofen, who scored 80 kills in this during the war, highest scoring ace of World War I. He was actually shot down by an Australian, believed to be... The evidence has continued to grow and mount, and there's always been a lot of controversy, and it's still not completely put to bed. But the latest evidence as of about 1998 points to Cedric Popkin, a gunner of the 24th Machine Gun Company. Australians were the first to the crash site, and as I heard someone saying before, Australians were the first to start souveniring or pilfering from the aircraft, doing what Australians do best, back in those days in particular. They did actually remove his boots and other items from the man himself. Nearly all of the items that the Australians pilfered or souvenired that day have ended up in the Canberra War Memorial. That's actually members of 3 Squadron the following day. So you can see by the time it's actually been removed from the front and taken, that's only about 3 miles behind the front, you can see she's pretty much already stripped bare. Now remember, that aircraft landed pretty much intact. You can see, no longer. It was actually Australian troops that buried Manfred von Richthofen with full military honours. So it has a strong Australian connection, being red and being definitely the most famous aircraft of World War I, but quite possibly the most famous aircraft of all time, especially amongst non-aviators. We've decided that was the ideal way to go. The aircraft, a lot of people aren't quite aware of this, all the Fokker fighters from the Eindecker onwards were all built with mild steel welded fuselages and built-up wooden wings. The torsional strength in the fuselage comes from the cross wires, but because of the cantilever spar wing design, it doesn't have all the cross wire bracing on the wings that you see on something like all the Sopwith designs or any of the French Newport designs. I had initially, when we were living in Sydney, I did look at working in with some organisations to try and build a Fokker triplane there to leave and promote their organisation. That didn't work out for a number of reasons, mainly time and space. So we ended up importing one from Florida. That's literally how it arrived out of a 40-foot shipping container. Dave Walsh got onto it, moved that around into the hangar. We pulled it out, started working on it. Dave's crane, sorry, probably should explain. Dave Walsh is the engineer who's done all of the work on the TAVAS aircraft. Dave has an extensive background himself. Dave's going to be talking about all the technical aspects of putting these aircraft together. He's going to be talking about the reproductions as opposed to the replicas, and in particular the sort of engines we're looking at. We've got 2 rotary engines coming to keep these things authentic. Dave's been an amazing help throughout every stage, usually through the use of heavy equipment like that and making the toughest jobs relatively simple. That's him at work just immediately prior to the test flight, actually doing his final checks on it before sending us out. And of course it has flown, and I can only apologise once again that it hasn't flown here.
The wind has got it.
Yeah, I might shot that over.
Full of projectors, boys. Is that how it flies? Hope not.
Do we have your attention now?
Yeah.
And he's also really good at setting up projectors and screens and stuff. So. Yeah, it's not quite square. That's it, yeah, that way. Yep. I've just shut that, yeah. Everyone can see that all right, can they? So yeah, it has flown quite successfully. We've got about 7 hours on it so far. We are free to do a bit more with it. Where we became very, very lucky was when we first got in touch with this man, Achim Engels from Germany. Achim's a unique individual in his own right. At age 15, he started to research all about Fokker, in particular the triplane, the DR1. In case you're not aware, there's a lot of information that doesn't exist anymore. After the war, a lot of information got destroyed. There are no original Fokker triplanes anywhere in the world, and there are no original drawings, complete set of drawings anywhere in the world. So Achim and a couple of his friends settled around doing a hell of a lot of research, coming up with their own drawings and producing a very accurate reproduction. That reproduction he finished at age 17 or 18, and it now hangs in the Speyer Museum in Germany. He's then gone on to produce other incredibly accurate reproductions, some of which are flying in New Zealand and other parts of the world. Basically, he builds a prototype and then from that builds the rest of his aircraft. We've been lucky enough to secure 3 of his prototypes. So we've got the Eindecker, the E3 Eindecker, which was the first true fighter of the war, we'll talk about in a minute, the Fokker D7, and of course the last fighter of the war, Fokker fighter of the war, was the Fokker D8, which is what he's sitting in here. We were just very lucky to strike up a sort of a similar mindset. We were able to relate to him, he was able to relate to us and what we were trying to do and trying to achieve, and he's placed aircraft on us on a long-term loan for us to complete and fly here as we see fit. It's a fairly open sort of agreement. He's actually started working on other aircraft now in Germany. As he finishes those and starts flying those, if we're interested in those aircraft, we can actually swap flying aircraft from here with those aircraft, and so over a period of 18, 20 years, we can actually start to cycle different aircraft through Australia like that. They'll all be Fokkers because that's what his fascination is with. One of the guys that works with Achim is a guy called Jerry Moss. He's actually Australian born, but he's living in the UK, has done for many decades, and he heads across to Germany and works on these aircraft with Achim. He was actually in Australia, came up yesterday to help us work out some fabric issues on the Eindecker that we'll talk about shortly. So so we've got the triplane flying. We expect that'll attract a lot of attention, get people thinking about it again. It certainly attracted a lot of attention on the test flight. We came in and landed on runway 12 at Caboolture, and we had to fly over the highway. And a good friend of ours came running in afterwards, and what had happened is he'd seen this accident about to happen on the highway. I'll let you deal with that, Dave. All the cars had seen this red triplane coming into land, so they'd all sort of stopped on the highway and almost caused an accident. Yeah, it's not too bad if you can just face it away again. That's not too bad. So the next aircraft we're going to get flying is the Fokker D8. Now they're not in a time sequence, unfortunately. The Fokker D8 came out in the last few months of the war. The reason we've chose to go with this one is because it's the most complete, as you'll see as I slip through the photos. But anyway, it only entered the war in the last 2 to 3 months of the war, so it never really got to prove itself. Not too much is known about it. It's a parasol wing, meaning it's a high wing sitting above the fuselage. It's not actually attached to the fuselage directly. Once again, Dave Walsh's heavy equipment in action. Now, it does actually have a rotary engine fitted to it. It was 110 horsepower. They did try 160 horsepower. They just couldn't get those engines into production quick enough at the end of the war. So they put 110 horsepower into it and sent it into the air. At the time, we had a Rotec radial, and Dave went to a hell of a lot of trouble to manufacture this incredible mount to be retrofitted to that very authentic, that's 100% accurate reproduction D8, that one. So that particular photo shows an Australian-built Rotec radial fitted to it. And on the night we had some reenactors. I think it looks the part. That certainly doesn't look out of place. Dave had done an incredible job on it. It had taken a hell of a lot of time and effort. I got a phone call saying to me, why have you fitted a radial to your D8? Wouldn't it be better with a 160 gnome horsepower rotary? And I just laughed and said, yeah, good one, dickhead, but where am I going to get one of those from? And he said, well, I've got 4 of them and I've just been offered it. Sorry?
Big W.
Yeah, I wish. That's what they say. They say Fokker had no problems getting rotary engines for his aircraft because he had a share in the factory. So whenever he wanted one, he'd just take one. Geez, I wish it was that easy today. So I ended up ringing Dave and said, Dave, I've got this opportunity to purchase a gnome rotary to replace the radial and all the work you've done. Should I go ahead with it? And thankfully he said yes, because there's a hell of a lot of work that's gone into that. We haven't operated that yet. The rotary will arrive this coming week. It is an original 1917 gnome rotary. It has been worked and it is currently running. So there will be some work I use the universal we, I mean Dave, will have to do when it arrives. And it's a learning experience as he goes. But we're both learning as we go. I read the same literature he does. He just picks out a lot more detail than I do and he brings it to my... Did you notice this? Yeah, yes I did now. So that's where we're at. That needs to have instruments fitted. It needs to have the 160 gnome rotary engines fitted to it. I know this is a fairly well-educated audience, but I just need to make this clear because many, many times when I've spoke about a rotary engine in the past, people say to me, oh, you mean like in a Mazda? No. It sounds funny, but most of them are highly experienced pilots that say that to me. So obviously, this engine's fixed and this propeller turns, okay? On a rotary, it's quite the opposite. The propeller is fixed to the engine and the entire engine turns. That's how they manage to get maximum RPM, maximum power, and be able to cool them. Because at the time, the speeds the aircraft were moving at just weren't quick enough to air cool an engine. So they actually got the engine to spin and that way cool it. So that's the next aircraft we're looking to put into the air. And as I say, if we can put that gnome rotary on it, apart from the instruments, it'll be 100% authentic. We've tried working with CASA on this. There's no way around it. CASA will not let us get away without having an airspeed indicator in knots and a calibrated altimeter. I can understand the reason for the altimeter. The airspeed, I don't think, is that important. But we've put the argument to them, they know what we're trying to do, we can't win. So it's up to us to disguise that as best we can and make the aircraft look as authentic as possible. This is the aircraft that's attracted the most attention so far. And strangely enough, it's the one that's the least known about. This is the E3 Eindecker. This was known as the first true fighter. So there was obviously two versions before it, the E1, the E2, and there was one after it, the E4. The E3 was the most successful, with about 250 of these built. It's a wing warper. There are no ailerons, the entire wing twists. It doesn't have elevators, it's a full flying stab. And it's a free floating rudder. It's a typical Fokker comma rudder. That in itself is quite interesting. Then you've got to stick a 100 horsepower engine up the front, a rotary. So now you've got a great big spinning mass with this combination of different type of controls, I suppose you'd say. We're not quite sure how it's going to fly. I think it's going to be an interesting experience. There's going to be a lot learnt from that. But it worked well in the day. Max Immelmann made his fame and he made his name on this particular aircraft, perfecting the Immelmann turn as a combat manoeuvre. The particular engine we've got on there now is just a hollow copy of a Gnome 100 horsepower. We've actually commissioned a guy in New Zealand, Tony Wittenberg, at the Classic Aero Machining Services, to reverse engineer a Gnome for us. So that's the first of what was supposed to be 5 years building. At this stage he's only building 2. They've now just recently put the pistons and conrods in it. It's getting very close to completion. We're expecting the first run of that to happen about end of February. So I'm intending to be over in New Zealand for that. The linen we're going to cover it with is authentic linen. There's a family-run business in Belgium that's been a family-run business and registered since 1910. They've been making the fabric for aircraft since 1910. The same fabric that they were making for the Germans to cover the Eindecker in 1915, they are now producing again today. So we have secured the exact same weave and thread count material that was used back in 1915. As that photo I showed you of Jerry Moss was up yesterday educating us on how that linen's got to be applied, because there are some technical issues there that had me completely stumped. Again, having an expert in the field makes all the difference. So again, that will be 100% completely authentic. It is mild steel, that's not chrome moly or anything like that. It's welded mild steel exactly as was used at the time. The wood's all exactly as used at the time. The glue is the difference. The Germans had a lot of problems with their glues during World War I, especially with moisture getting into them. All these aircraft have been built using aviation grade epoxy. Again, we can't get past the instrument side of it. The beauty of this one is, in the ammunition box, it has a little fold down flap. We can actually stick the instruments in there, and once we close the flap up, no one will know they're there, and when we're flying we can lower the flap. This was the first aircraft ever to have a synchronised machine gun on it, so the first one you could fire through the propeller. So at a time when people were still using pistols and rifles and shooting out the back, and other people had machine guns mounted on the top or out the back of the aircraft, this was the first one that could come up behind its prey, get directly in line with it, shoot, and it caused absolute devastation. For several months there it was known as the Fokker Scourge. It was brought up in the Parliament of England. This was a great atrocity, and the Poms were so far behind, what were they going to do? Well, as soon as one of these fell down behind the lines, the Poms were actually able to just copy it, and the war progressed. Fairly basic instrumentation. It doesn't have anything other than an RPM counter, a couple of pulsators, a couple of switches, and an air pressure gauge. There's a little pump we've got coming this week. You actually got to pump the fuel tank, which back here, brass fuel tank. You've got to put air pressure into that to feed the fuel forward to it, and then the fuel and oil mix goes into the rotary engine. For those of you who don't know, a rotary engine is a complete loss system. Any oil that comes into it gets lost. It all gets expended out through the engine. Pilot ends up wearing some of it, and the aircraft ends up wearing all the rest. It's a synchronisation gear there. You pull that and it sets up the cams and the levers. I don't fully understand the full technical aspect of it, which then allows the gun to fire through the propeller. The machine gun switch is in the middle there, and there's a blip switch here. That's the only control you have over the rotary engine, on or off, on or off. He's gone to a lot of trouble because this was quite a sophisticated aircraft for its time. You couldn't see obviously below the wings. For those who haven't noticed, that's actually the compass out here. Compass is mounted in the wing. There's a couple of sliding doors here, so you can actually slide those doors open. You can see underneath the wing, and you can actually open up the floor here and see below you. So it had a lot of advantages over other aircraft of the time, which mainly were all biplanes, wires and struts, maybe an observer. Sometimes like the B-2, the observer sat in the front and could see bugger all. So this aircraft would have been an absolute revolution in the day. That's actually how it's transported to the front. That's Akram's wife. You actually just, there's two little points here, one there and one on the fuselage. There's two metal pipes on the wing. It literally just gets mounted alongside the fuselage. You can stick it on a train, you can stick it behind a horse, you can cart it out there. Any way you want to transport it can be transported, and that's actually how Fokker made his name. There were other more successful fighters at the time, none that were shooting through the propeller as his was, but none that could easily be transported to the front, and that was the great success of the E3. That's just a close-up of the engine we've had manufactured. A lot of people have seen it. Actually, that whole aeroplane, we've had people say to us, we can't cover it and fly it. It's a museum piece. It's so beautiful, people said it'd be a shame to do it. I tend to agree, but it'd be a shame not to fly it. People are now saying the same about the engine. Those who've seen this, the workmanship on this engine, are saying, you know, you need to keep it as a museum piece. It's a bloody expensive museum piece, I can tell you, so we want to get it going. I don't know if this will work. No, it won't. That was just me showing you how the rotary spins. So the triplane's flying. The D8 will have flying this year. I'm hoping to have that iron decker covered and flying this year. We have a deadline of March of next year. It has to be flying by. My favourite aircraft and the most successful Fokker aircraft of the war, the D7, is the one that needs the most work and will take us the longest to do. And finding an engine for this is actually going to be quite difficult. It's an inline 6-cylinder Mercedes or BMW engine was used, anywhere from about 160 to 200 horsepower. We have got a couple of options in mind, but nothing we've acted on at this stage. As I say, about 3,300 of these were built. I don't know if you can tell by looking at the photos, but these have got very, very thick cords. The wing, the British and the French in particular went the other way. They said there's too much drag in a thick airfoil, so they went for very thin airfoils. Gave them more speed, but also gave them very, very nasty stall characteristics. The Germans went the other way. They found the type of airfoil they were using gave plenty of lift. They still had very good speed. This was comparative with anything else at the time. But they could fly at much higher angles of attack. They could outturn the enemy. They could get underneath the enemy at a very high angle of attack and just strafe them. Like all the fuel tanks are all brass. The workmanship on those is just incredible. And that's what it'll look like finished. That is the one at Omaka. That's the one that was actually used in the movie The Blue Max. So that's basically the TAVAS collection at the moment. We do have opportunities where other rare stuff comes up all the time. I'm kind of amazed at some of the offers we get. This one's been offered to us. This is called the Johnson monoplane. Now, unfortunately, it has absolutely no reference to anything in Australian aviation history, which is a real shame. I'd love to have it. Have something, you know, relates more to Australia. This aircraft's remarkable in its own right in the sense that, let me get this right, there's three Johnson brothers. We all know who the Johnson brothers are. They made Johnson Marine outboard engines. And what happened is they lived on a lake and they got sick of paddling up and down the lake. So they couldn't understand why you couldn't just make an engine. So they went and made a boat engine. And it was more powerful and better than any boat engine you could buy. With the success of that, the three brothers go, this aviation lark's pretty cool, why don't we get involved in that? Never having seen an aircraft before, only ever having bought Flight magazine, which was available at the time, they decided to build their own monoplane, which was pretty unique in 1909. I know Blériot did it, but most of the other stuff at the time was all biplane to get the strength. What the Johnsons couldn't work out is why everyone was using such low horsepower and using these great big radiators to stick into the airstream. If you've got low power and heaps of drag, surely that's got to be, you know, a bad thing. So they actually went and designed their own engine and their own special radiator system which actually runs flush along the fuselage. This reproduction's been built and is being donated to TAVAS. Completely unique for the time. It's a tricycle gear, and everything else was tail dragger. These were the first guys to use tricycle gear. They're first to use a brake, and they're first to use aluminium. The fuselage was actually made out of wood. They found it was too, they didn't know anything about C or G, but once it sat there and just kept falling on its tail, they thought that probably isn't going to work. So they actually, I can't remember the type of metal, it's the old equivalent of aluminium, whatever. So this guy's gone and made 100% accurate reproduction and is donating it to TAVAS. So that's where we stand. We're wanting to work with any other groups just to get this out there, get people enthused, get people interested, share the word. We'd like to see more people building World War I aircraft. To build those accurate reproductions is a big ask. We realise that. There's a hell of a lot of time that's gone into them, and I'll show you some of the work some of the people have done around Australia. But we just want to get people aware of it, get interested in aviation again, get interested in history, and go and start learning about this stuff themselves. If we could get people who'd be interested then to become engineers or pilots as a result of it, that's a real bonus. Other people's projects around Australia, as I said to you, my favourite period is actually pre-World War I. In Narromine, going back about 10 years ago now, the guys down there made a 1905 Wright flyer. So the Wrights first flew at the end of 1903. They did 4 flights on that aircraft that never flew again. In 1904, they did a lot more flights on a newer version, which was very successful. In 1905, they got everything right. This aircraft could, it's the same engines that were used in 1903, but by this stage, they'd really worn and embedded in. Instead of getting 12 horsepower, they were getting 20 horsepower. Instead of having to lie down, they're now sitting upright. You could actually take a passenger. This was the first truly practical aircraft. It could take off under its own steam. It didn't need the catapult launch like they had been using. It could take off, it could manoeuvre around, it could do figure eights, it could fly around a paddock, and it could land where it started from. Now that doesn't sound like much, but even as late as 1910, 1911, most aircraft produced could take off, fly straight ahead and land. And then you turn it around, get out, turn it around, and then go back and do the same thing the other way. To land where you started from after manoeuvring was exceptional. This is actually flying in Narromine, and it's very, very impressive. There's a guy locally who's got a Blériot. This isn't a photo of his, but it's a very close representation. He's done an exceptional job on it. He's used a Honda 50 horsepower motor, but he's very cleverly hidden that behind an Anzani 3-cylinder mock-up. Point Cook have just flown a Bristol box kite. Now, my biggest disappointment in all of this stuff is how little the RAF's actually done. I don't know why it's up to individuals like us to recreate this period in time when it really should be something the RAF's doing. The RAF's taken all the credit for this, but it was actually volunteers, museum volunteers, who started the project, got it up and going, and finished the project. Very impressive aircraft in its own right. Now, this is what Australians learnt to fly in. When Point Cook was formed and our first students flew literally 100 years ago, the first instructor flight took place in March of 1914. That's what it was in. And it literally did, as I said, took off, flew straight ahead and landed. That was all it could do. And I think that's a fantastic photo which really highlights how far we've come. That's what we used to train in. That's what we train our RAF pilots in today. And that's what I'd like to see more of. If we can see more representation like that, I think that really highlights the point. The RAF Museum do have at Point Cook do have a Sopwith pup. This was actually made by Transavia back in 1979. They made 2 of them. They're a welded steel fuselage and built-up wooden wings. They're running a radial in it, 80 horsepower radial, but by all intents they look the part, they sound the part, and they perform just as the real thing should. That's the sister ship. That's at Riddles Creek. That's been out of action for quite a few years now due to an accident, but I've only just been informed that may be flying by next month. So, or flying again, I should say. This is without a doubt the most accurate aircraft flying in Australia at the moment. This is in Serpentine, Western Australia, just about an hour's drive south of Perth. This is a 100% accurate reproduction down to everything. Many of the metal parts on it are actually off Sopwith pups from the wall. The canopy frame here and the glass and the joystick are all out of the actual pup he's modelled it on. The rotary engine is an 80 horsepower Larone out of an actual pup. That is as authentic as it's going to get, and a real credit to the man. He says it's a delight to fly. He says the rotary engine issues aren't really an issue. You know, if the aircraft's nice to fly, the torque's not such a big deal. And of course the difference is all of us flying today have a lot more experience than the poor kids who were flying these things back in the day. And it all counts. It all makes for a safer experience, which is ultimately what we're all about. A school teacher is actually building this on the Central Coast. Again, an incredibly accurate reproduction. You have to see the workmanship that's gone into this Albatross D5A. Absolutely staggering. He's going to power it with a Chevy motor, Chevy 454 I think it is. He's got a particular reduction gear drive on it which he's had dynoed, and he says it gives him exactly the same RPM and torque as the original Mercedes engine. So he can turn the exact same prop at the exact same speed and get exact same performance. He has built the top and bottom wings. I believe they'll be finished by, well, definitely by the end of this year, hopefully before then. And that just goes to show what some people are doing in their garage. This is in Victoria. This is a Sopwith Snipe. Again, incredibly accurate reproduction. A Cathay Pacific pilot, retired, and this is what he's been doing. Again, working in his garage. It's quite a small garage, and those who know anything about the Sopwith Snipe, it's an absolutely huge aircraft. This is going to be moved to TAVAS, thank you, in the next couple of weeks. He's going to start rigging it up. It will be at the Tyre Bear Show in March, complete, but it won't have flown by that stage. But that's how close he is getting. So a lot of people doing some incredible work. He's using a Boeing Stearman, whatever, the 225 horsepower, I think it is, radial. Yeah. So originally it had a Bentley BR2 230 horsepower rotary. Now I was lucky enough to see one of those go in New Zealand before they put it in their snipe. I just saw it on a test stand. It's terrifying. Something that big, turning over at 1600 RPM, it has a noise unlike anything I've ever heard of in my life before. But to think that they used to fit that to wooden bearers in a wooden aircraft, absolutely amazing. And that was pretty much approaching the absolute limit of what rotary engines could do because of the way they work, which Dave will explain. The centrifugal forces and everything. Once you start exceeding 250 horsepower, you really start to ask for a lot of trouble. So that's why inline engines then took over. Of all the members we've got who contacted us and let us know what they're doing, we know there's at least one other very accurate pup being made at the moment, at least 4 triplanes, all from the same plans as that mine's been built from. Most of them will be powered by the same engines, or they may use the Rotec radial. Several Newports, a Sopwith Camel, I don't have any other details on it than that, and an extremely accurate Fokker E5, which is basically the precursor to the D8, so it'll look exactly the same as our D8, and it'll be as accurately built as that. And he actually has a proper Oberrussel 2 110 horsepower engine for it. So, and of course that's not including the airdrome aeroplane replicas being built. Bruce is going to talk to you today about airdrome builds. He's probably the most experienced person on it. He's assisting other people on this airfield do it. I'm sure a lot of you have come to see exactly that. It's, without a doubt, especially now, we've only got 4 years. We've got a 4-year period in which we can capture the centenary of World War I. And we'd like to organise various flybys in various locations over that time to capture people's attention and interest and as I say, get them to become self-educated, self-aware and go and learn more about it. The airdrome aeroplane kits are without a doubt the quickest way to go. Any of those reproductions you've seen is years and years of work, years and years of study in some cases before they even start the work. Bruce will talk to you in detail about the airdrome kits, but they are relatively inexpensive to purchase. They're very complete kits. They're relatively quick and easy to build, and they're easy to fly. Okay, some liberties have been taken in the airfoil design and all the rest of it, and I think that's a great thing. You know, we're not trying to win a war here. A lot of us are just private pilots. There's no point going up and killing ourselves If you can fly an accurate looking reproduction, an accurate looking replica safely, I think that's far more important than getting it absolutely historically correct and killing yourself. So if you can get it to look right and perform right, I think it still has great educational value to the rest of the public. Okay, that hasn't quite worked out. It's been a pretty brief presentation, but we just want to give you an overview of what we're doing, what other people are doing. If you want to learn more about us, the best place to go is the website, tavas.com.au. If you want to come up later and get little pamphlets that's got it on, if you don't think you can remember that. All the information's on there. We've got plenty of good videos. The website's quite new. We've been running a website for a couple of years. This one's only 3 years old. It's got a lot of updated information on it. But all of the day-to-day updates go on Facebook. That's the easiest way for us to do it. So it's, you can get to that through the website anyway. And the whole point of all of this is simply we want to bring aviation history to life. We want to be able to educate people. And that's what that was meant to show. We can quite literally bring history to life. So thank you. Has anyone got any questions? No? Well, that was easy. I'll hand over to Dave Walsh, who'll just give him a couple of minutes to get set up and put his spin on things, but he can talk to you about some of the other technical aspects of what we've been doing.
Myself, Andrew's done that for me, and there are probably some faces that I've seen before. But as Andrew said, my background is pure engineering, so I'm a newcomer to this warbird side of things. So therefore, I'm not really good on history when you start to the history side of things. I'm learning as we go along, but I'm using my basic skills going back from my early apprenticeship days when we did have rag-covered aeroplanes, and working with the engines and the process that we've got as we go along. Now, as Andrew said, the first aeroplane that we're flying is the WW1, and we did have a few problems when it first came out of the case and put it together. It was supposed to be ready to fly and fully serviceable. However, we did find a few things. I think the statement made by the chap that passed it on to Andrew was that it would be safe for his wife and children to go flying in it. We thought maybe he didn't like his wife and children very much. But not to worry, we found all of the little defects as we went along. They weren't all that serious, but they were things that made the aeroplane not quite the ideal ship that it should have been. So having touched all those up, we finally got the aeroplane into the air, and Andrew found that he had to be a little bit strong to fly the aeroplane, because it did mass out when we worked it all out to be very tail heavy. Probably just due to the construction. It's quite heavy steel tube structure, and the aeroplane with the Lycoming engine in it is much lighter in the front, and so naturally it becomes tail heavy. We were concerned about it, but we tried everything we could. It was recommended to put some weight up the front, so we did add some lead weights, and I'll just move through these. We had two problems. One was the fact that it was tail heavy, and the method of rectifying that, of course, was poor old Andrew had to push very hard forward on the stick to hold the tail up by means of using the elevators to support the back of the aeroplane. They did re-rig the angle on the horizontal stabiliser, but it was reaching its limit. There was no more room to put more washers underneath to pack it up, and so therefore we started to look for other methods. Now, I've got my slides out of sequence, but we did put a large mass of lead up alongside the engine to try and make it nose heavy. However, that alone was not sufficient. So we started to turn to the rigging and check on the rigging of the wings, and we did find that there was a bit of discrepancy. Even though they were all supposed to be the same angle of incidence, we did find that they were quite different. So we went about shifting washers around to get that all back to a standard arrangement. But we still found that it was quite tail heavy, even though we had taken quite a few washers out of the centre main plane, the mid main plane. It had been packed up with washers as was specified in the instructions. But when we took that back to standard, it looked in a much better condition. And Andrew flew the aeroplane in that condition, and it did perform much better. We looked like we were heading in the right direction. You can see the result of this by just looking at the little diagram that I put together there. It's unlike a monoplane where you've just got centre of pressure and centre of gravity where you can work with one item. When you've got 3 wings, you're looking at a mean effect of those 3 wings. And so, of course, by altering the angle of incidence on the upper main plane, we could manage to reduce the drag and reduce the lift on that forward point, and therefore move the lift further aft. And that's eventually what was done. It's extremely exaggerated here, of course, but the upper main plane was decreased in angle of attack, and therefore more lift had to be taken up on the more rear position wings, and so of course that helped on the CRG situation. And whilst I had in the back of my mind something about a trick that was used in many early days, which was to put a small piece of cord along the trailing edge of the elevators to displace the elevator, I couldn't find any support of it, and I was reluctant to suggest this to Andrew. However, I turned up there one day after he'd been talking to the glider boys, and one of the glider fellows said, "Why don't you put a piece of rope along the trailing edge of the elevators?" So I was quite relieved to know that someone else had heard of that process as well, and after taping a piece on there, it definitely works. And as you can see, the basic idea is that it causes a slowing down of the air, which of course causes a positive pressure on the top, pushes it down, which gave him the effect of raising the tail of the aeroplane. It's amazing how small amount, first off I think you ended up with about, to use the old term, 12 inches or so, was sufficient, and then of course after we re-rigged the main planes, it's gone down now. It's only probably about 100 and something. Yes, yeah. So it definitely works if you need that as a trim process, and it doesn't look all that bad. You don't have to add a little bit of tin sticking out the back to bend up and down, which becomes obvious that it's not original, whereas this doesn't really show up that much at all, to just have a small piece. And it's only something like 10 mil or a quarter of an inch or so in the old days. No, that's not right, it's half an inch in the old days, but it's only a small rope, it's not huge, it's just enough to spoil that airflow and create a little bit of pressure on the top. So little things like that we're learning as we go along, but we are getting there. And we're happy to pass on that sort of information as we go. As Andrew mentioned, on the D8 we did fit the Rotec radial up there for start, and it was a bit of a chore because we wanted to keep it in the same cowl arrangement as the original. We had the original cowl for it, and so therefore there was no room for the engine mount to come straight off the firewall as you would normally project it forward. So we had to actually do a reverse projection where the mount projected back inside behind the firewall, and then we were going to enclose the firewall around the mount. We didn't get to that final stage, but we did get to a stage of making the mount and hanging it in there for his Meet the Fockers. As he mentioned, as you can see, the brass fuel tank was an integral tank which had 2 sections in it. One section was for the oil and the other section was for the fuel. The problem with fitting a Rotec is that you've got a recirculating oil system which would take hot oil back into the tank, and that would be totally unacceptable alongside the fuel tank. It would have heated the fuel, boiled the fuel off. So we were forced into a situation of having to take the fuel tank out and probably manufacture one with 2 separate portions and some sort of heat insulation in between. We wanted to try and keep the original oil filler up on the side, so otherwise you would have just put the oil tank down the bottom, but that wouldn't look very original. So we were working on that idea. However, now, since we're going to put a rotary in there, we've gone to the stage of leaving the tank back in there. So it's a bit of a shame, but never mind. It looked good for the day when it was up there. And as you can see, it did look quite, well, you saw that slide before, it did look quite original if you didn't look too closely and know that it wasn't going to spin around. Just to go a little bit further with the story that Andrew was saying before, on the little bit of research that I've done, it's quite obvious that there were quite a stage of development through the rotary engine. The starting point in this particular one is what we call a, I hope I've got my sequence right. No, I haven't got my sequence right, sorry. There were 2 different types of engine introduced anyway. The original engine, of which we're going to have 1 or 2 of eventually, has a bit of a combination of a 2- and a 4-stroke process. It has the exhaust valve in the top of the head, which is just a single valve, and that's how the one that I need to find, and if I can find it quickly, I'll just flick through here. This is it here. It has a single valve in the top of the head, and the 2-stroke ports around the bottom is the process in which the fuel gets from the crankcase up into the cylinder. But operating on a 4-stroke process, then it's quite complex because you've got to have a power stroke where the cylinder is coming down under pressure, but then you don't want that pressure there when the two-stroke port opens, otherwise the exhaust gases get forced into the crankcase, and the crankcase is naturally enough full of fuel. At first I thought, this is going to be disastrous. If there's a backfire there, we'll blow the crankcase apart. The trick, of course, is that the fuel in the crankcase, or the mixture in the crankcase, is extremely rich. It's far too rich to burn. The air comes in through the exhaust valve. They leave the exhaust valve open on the intake stroke so that it induces air from the outside, and then only at the bottom of the stroke does the fuel from the crankcase transfer up, and now the mixture is in the correct combustion to be able to burn. So it's quite a tricky process how they manage to do this. I'll just flick through a couple. You'll have to forgive me for being out of sequence here, but that's the exhaust, or the exhaust and intake valve. Naturally enough, it does the one job in the top of the head, and that's it. It's quite interesting. In the very early ones, it didn't use a spring. In fact, they tried to balance the weight, because you can imagine the push rods flailing around, try and come up and open the valves. So they've got a balance weight on the top to counteract the flailing push rods, and all sorts of things, including oil feed up the push rods, which of course is a later process, but they thought that was pretty good for their time. So quite a number of things to have a look at. If I can, I've lost my, just hold with me a moment please. Now, which one have I got here? Now this, I've just done a quick number of slides here that I can go through, and you'll be able to see the basic operation of it. This is the early engine, which has a valve in the top of the piston to allow the mixture from the crankcase to come up, but it's not like a two-stroke in the fact that there's no compression in the crankcase. The crankcase is just an induction system where the fuel and oil mixture come in. There is a port where the oil is actually sprayed in and goes into various places. They don't exactly mix it like a two-stroke. It's actually sprayed into specific ports so that it ends up going through pipes and passages. There's even a tube goes up the connecting rod to feed the oil up to the gudgeon pin, or whatever piston pin as you want to call it. So quite an intriguing process, but if we started the cycle here with the air intake, the exhaust valve open, as the piston comes down, it brings in just fresh air from outside. And we then go round the cycle from there. Of course, after the induction, it's I've probably had the one. If I go through these, we'll find the right ones all the way through. Hang on a second till I get to the start. Rightio, there's the one I want. As it's coming down on that induction stroke, the exhaust valve closes, and at the bottom of the stroke, the pressure now is decreasing in here. So you've actually got suction in here, which sucks that fuel up through past that valve and goes into the cylinder so that it's the right mixture. And then of course continuing to turn around, it'll then become a compression stroke. So these, if they work out right, should just about, and then of course at the top of the compression stroke, the ignition is fired. The ignition system is quite intriguing. There is the complete back of this is the distributor rotor, so that you've got one point where the spark is induced, and when it lines up, it will naturally enough fire that cylinder. And as it moves around, it'll pick the correct cylinders to fire as it goes, in timing with the magneto. The other unit down here is the oil pump and timing device for the cannons, or the guns, and that pumps the oil up and injects it into those ports inside. So I don't know whether this, I'll just try see if I can get it to work in my process. I think they're out of sequence by the look of it. But induction, yeah, doesn't look like it's going to work on this time, but never mind. Normally if I flick through it'll go up and down and you can see them. But that's the model that actually has two valves, whereas the earlier one that we're going to be looking at is called the mono valve. I won't try and pronounce its name. It's mono super or something or another, but yeah, but the name means one valve, and it means it's only got an exhaust valve. There is no intake valve. The intake is done by those ports in the lower part of the cylinder, and if I can find my way back to them. So the other type of engine that we're looking at is this one, which is the one that we're going to have a little more experience with. And this one has these ports in the side where the fuel can come up and go through. I think they actually quote how many holes there are in the base of the cylinder to allow that fuel to go through. So once again, if I go through the cycles, we should be able to see what happens here. So we've got air coming in. Yeah, they've fallen out of sequence in this process. But as you can see in this one here, at the bottom of that induction stroke, after it drew in the air from outside, it eventually shuts at just before the horizontal here at 85 degrees after top dead centre. So the power stroke only operates from top dead centre to 85 degrees, which is a very small amount of power stroke. Normally you would leave it till nearly bottom dead centre before you would open an exhaust valve. But it has to open here because by the time it gets to the port opening, if pressure still existed in the cylinder, it would blow exhaust gases into the crankcase. So they're very, very clever in getting it open early, but you can see why a fairly large engine didn't really produce all that much horsepower. The efficiency wasn't there. But it does produce enough to fly, so that's the main thing. So that's, unfortunately, as I say, my sequence doesn't go, but you should be able to go round and round and watch it work. So just going back to those, it was the other one, wasn't it? Sorry. So this is the engine that we're going to be looking at, and if you look very closely, you can see the slots around there, and there are holes drilled correspond to that to come from there. The other intriguing thing, of course, is the cam pack that's on the front. It's relatively conventional because it turns at half the engine speed, but of course it goes around with the engine, so it looks rather mysterious. But it still drives the push rods the same as it would in a conventional engine. I'm still trying to research how many cam tracks we actually have, because there seems to be a little bit of controversy as to some of the photographs show a different number to what seems to be suggested. The suggestion on the overhaul manual of this, which is only about 5 pages, I might add, there's nothing very much to it, but in that early section it does deliberately say that there are the same number of cam followers as numbers of cylinders. So and in fact it gives you a sequence. It says that number 9 cam operates number 1 cylinder for some reason or another. And then in the explanation later on it says what happened is in the early development everything was numbered, and then they found out no, that wasn't the correct numbering, so they just made a chart to say 1 works 9 and 2 works 7 and things like this, because they didn't want to change the numbering that they had. So there you go. But in reality the cam for number 1 works number 1, but it's just numbered differently on their diagram. So that's what sits in the front, the cam mechanism. I couldn't copy a video of it, but if you want to have a look on the websites, you'll find that there are some videos of this sort of thing, which is quite interesting. I think there was a minor discrepancy when I watched it the other night, but I won't contradict the chap involved, and we'll let him go away with it. But for sure, this is the process that it works on with that 4-stroke valve and 2-stroke intake. Now, as Andrew said, because of that process, you can't throttle the intake, because if you created a vacuum inside the crankcase, then nothing would transfer up, so it would either be on or off, so you can't use a throttle. The only throttle mechanism is going to be disabling cylinders. Now, on later models, they actually made a distributor cam that could disable a cylinder every 3rd revolution, so that it would still run smoothly, but it would take out a cylinder every 3rd revolution, which was a pretty complex method. I don't think we'll have that on ours. I'm not sure yet until it gets here and we have a look at it, but from the one that I can see is it's just going to have straight out being able to cut the ignition totally, and of course the problem with that is fouling plugs, but we'll see how we go with that one. These are just the items that they've been on the website. The chap manufacturing the engine has been putting these things up as he gets them going. As Andrew said, it's a reverse engineering job. They've got the original and they're copying them and making the parts to make the engine. So really, as I say, my part's just purely been assistance with the engineering side, and but I'm certainly happy to help anybody else along the way once we get our information sorted. We're certainly more than happy to pass on that information to anyone else who might need it. So I hope I've been some background to you chaps, and Any questions? Wonderful. Okay, well, enjoy the rest of your day. It's been a pleasure.
I'm the president of Watts Bridge here, and they've also, that's my pap on there. Now, this pap here was built from a Robert Bosley kit. Now, my approach to this is not actually for accurate reproduction, has to get the whole feel of what it was all about within a budget. And most of us here actually work in a low budget. It's the family first, the house, and everything else, then the aeroplane. But if you're interested in this sort of thing, you can do it at a budget price. I mean, and low hours, easy to build. Now this one, I'd say the hours are something like 800 hours to produce that. I won't measure in time because you get broken up. But if you put about 600 to 800 hours into one of these, that's what it'll look like if you put the time in. My history goes back to even further back than Dave's. My history goes back to de Havilland, and I was involved in tiger moths, and you know, and some of the frontline fighters that we were building then are now antiques now, so that makes me feel pretty good. Now, I got involved in this here. I came from New Zealand, already put together a Graham Lee Newport 12, which is the two-seat one, the big one, and I displayed it out here at the Festival of Flight. A lot of interest because the structure was such that it looked like what it was, but the structure was doable, and a lot of aero modelers came and said, I can do that, I can have one of these, I can do it, but they don't know it's available. Now they want the well-worn aeroplane, they can't afford the reproduction, the time or the money, but they want one. Now to me, this is the way to go. Now you'll see, we're down at my hangar later, we'll have a look at those, and some others getting built. We now have on Watts Bridge about 4 being built. There'll be, this year we'll have 4 of these going, which is the Puff, of course, and there's a Newport 24, a Fokker E1, and a Sopwith Camel. Now they should be going by the end of the year. What we put together here at Watts Bridge is a Builders Assist program, and thanks to our sponsors and volunteers and helpers and engineers, all contributing to make this so. Now we can actually put an aeroplane together, concentrate and build an aeroplane with a number of weeks. If you're going to put the time in, we will actually work with you to get the thing up and running. So it's not going to be 10,000 hours or $100,000. It's going to be the price of what you get it at the time, which is aluminium tube, pop fluids, bolts, and all modern. Now the engine on this one is just a Volkswagen. It's a Volkswagen with a 2-to-1 reduction drive, and it puts out more torque than the Rotec that people like, which is the radial, the Rotec. Looks nice, it has more appeal to look at than the Volkswagen, but the Volkswagen gives you more power, if you like, for these low, slow aeroplanes. It's probably a better proposition than the Rotec. So, and that's against, if you put the Volkswagen together with the reduction drive, you do it yourself, you're up for about, what, 8 grand or something thereabouts. If you buy a firewall forward, that's with the propeller and the engine mount and all that stuff that goes with the thing, you can get it for around about 9,000–10,000. If you put a Rotec radial in there, it's going to cost you, what, 25 or something, or 20, 25 or something? No, it's higher now. Yeah. Something in that region. So if you budgeted, well, there's a way to go. And I'm very happy to help you do that. Now, if you're a Watts Bridge member, you can come up and work in my hangar. We've got the tools, we've got the time, and it won't cost you anything. It'll cost you, or as long as you're prepared to do it, we'll help you do it. So what I'm saying about this is this structure is easier to do. It's about 3/4 of the way to the original, so you don't actually need the big power. I mean, that's 110 horsepower. That's 30 horsepower more than the original. But there's a difference between horsepower and torque. It's torque that makes them fly, not horsepower. So you've got to match the prop to the airframe, to the engine. And the Volkswagen works very well. You probably get about 800 hours before overhaul, but you can go and get the bits over the counter. There's no problem with that. So for a budget aeroplane, and you want the World War I or earlier, this is the way to go, as far as I'm concerned. I went through this way back in the 60s. I was in contact with Redfern then, Walt Redfern, and we were talking about building the DR1 from his drawings. And I took these to DCA, Department of Civil Aviation. They said, oh yeah, we'll have a look at this, but you've got to do this. And they kept me running around for weeks, and in the end I had to get a letter from the minister. They said, you can build it, but you can't fly it. Now, after pushing for a few years, the minister came back and said, okay, but there'll be severe restrictions on this aeroplane because it's unairworthiness, which is a lot of rubbish. They weren't going to accept a Fokker DR1, but Andrew's done it, good on him. But now we're lucky here, we've changed the rules thanks to RAA, the group, they've got the rules changed now. We can actually have all this, and there's ways to do it. I can't say much more about that really. If you're a Wattsbridge member and you want to build one of these, we're definitely there to help you. And we do it right here. We've got the tools, we've got the equipment, we've got a couple of hangars available to do it in, to store bits, to build in. And thanks to the people here, the engineers, we got about 4 engineers, LAMEs here willing to help. And if that's the way you want to go, well, you can talk to me. And we've already, as soon as we announce we're going to have the Builders Assist program, we've got the queue already. So we've got these airplanes now. We just got another one, and we've got to fit them in the queue. We're trying to get them up and running as quick as we can, because, as Andrew Carter said before, that we're right here, 1914-18. This is where people want to see it, and they're asking for it. So, do you got any takers? Anybody want a World War I aeroplane? Good on you.
And Airdrame gives you a choice of about a dozen aeroplanes from memory.
In which?
You've got a choice of about a dozen different types with Airdrame too.
Well, see, what we're using, we're not necessarily using Bosley kits, although that's a very good way to go.
With the kit, you get a good choice.
You get a good choice, and it's improved. I've noticed now with Bosley, since he brought his Sopwith baby in, he's actually producing a spar which is 4.5 times stronger than the original tube spars. So now he's looking at cantilever wings. So that's from the grapevine, talking to him and talking to the builders. So I think I've got an idea. He's building a Fokker D8 now, full scale, and because that was the difficulty, one wing, and it's not wire braced. So now he's got the cantilever wing, or he's going for it. It looks like, yeah, the world's your oyster if that's the way you want to go. Anybody going to buy an aerodrome kit? Yes.
What sort of investment in money are you looking at?
Investment for one of these? If you buy the kit, okay. Believe it or not, one of the cheaper ones, full scale, is the Fokker DR1. But there's a lot of ribs. There's something like 77 ribs to make. 77 ribs, that's right, something like that. But they're just under 10 grand for the whole kit. Now the kit, obviously instrument, engine, things are not in there. And the tyres aren't there, but the wheels are. But you've got to build it the way he says. And he's very shrewd the way Bosley puts his kits together. He gets a lot of his stuff from Boeing sales. He buys it by the container load and sorts out. So you'll get different grades of material to suit. And some of the hardest materials, like the 7075 T6 alloys, are quite difficult. You've got to be careful when you're bending them, because it's all cold work stuff, you know. And now he's getting his 6061 tube. He gets it commercially. It's an aircraft grade, but it's commercial tube, you know what I mean. It's not inspected as per aircraft. You know, when you got an aircraft tube, and they've written on there what it is. Now, a lot of the stuff he's using now is commercially produced, because that's what the Americans use in construction. So they're using the 6061 T6. So he can get that now, but it's a commercial grade, not all of it. So he keeps the cost down, but you're taking the risk, or he's taking the risk. But I mean, it's easy to see the commercial. All the rivets are commercial. All the rivets are either stainless steel pop type rivets or just straight zinc plated steel rivets. I think the zinc plated steel is probably better than the stainless, really, because there's no different metals corrosion, you know. Yeah. But they're quick. You might as well build a full scale one as the 3/4 scale, because there's just so little time difference, but they're to carry heavier load. Anyway, with that, I can say any questions you can ask me now or any other time. I'm always willing. I'm always here at Watts Bridge. You can come down and talk to me. And that's about it, I think. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.